begins to bend and bow on the standard, begins to take a lesser, to preach a lesser gospel than that the Church of God has taught, don't you follow him.
Could you please, Brother Layne, state your full name, including the middle name, please?
My name is Daniel Wilburn Layne, and I was born March the 30th, 1944, at King's Daughters Hospital in Ashland, Kentucky, by cesarean birth.
Learn something. How heavy was he?
Huh?
What was your birth weight?
Oh, I was heavy. I don't know.
Siblings in the order?
I'm the oldest of 3 children. We were actually 4. I have a sister 2 years younger, a brother 4 years younger, and I had another sister 2 years younger than him. And their names are Ruby Elizabeth, Henry Pleasant Layne III, and Janice Sue Layne. And she died, she only lived about 6 months. She was a blue baby. But there are 3 of us living now.
And your upbringing was then initially Kentucky?
My upbringing was where my birth was, in the tri-state area of eastern Kentucky. And my father was a minister. He had been served as a conscientious objector in World War II as a medic, and returned home. And when I was born in 44, he came home and was going to college to get a degree, pastoring in the country there in Meade Station, Kentucky, and building a house and building a tri-state sundries trucking business all at the same time. And the congregation he was pastoring was an Anderson congregation. He told me that his first salary for that first week's work out in the country was a bushel of turnips and a one-eared collie dog that he got. And most of the time he was being persecuted by people whose wives were getting saved, who were making liquor illegally out in the hills and bootlegging it into the tri-state area. Mob came one time to hang him out in front of the church house. It wasn't unusual at all for the country boys that were out there to throw rocks on the tin roof and disrupt the worship. And those are things that were part of my childhood there. It was really the country. It was dirt roads and cars going up to the running boards or over the running boards with, you may not know what running boards are, with in the streams, fording streams, and we had an old Ford, and he would pack that and have us children stand on the running board and hang on beside the car, and we'd travel back into the country to meet him back and forth. He preached a lot on the Church of God when I was little. I might say that my father and I were estranged, though. My mother had trouble bearing children because they had a blood difference. My father and my mother had a blood difference. And so she had a terrible time in pregnancy. And I was a very active, healthy little boy, which I shouldn't have been. And so I was raised during those years, by my maternal grandmother and grandfather. Dad was away in the war, and she was pregnant most of the time and having a hard time. So I began to look on my maternal grandparents as my parents. And when he came home, it was almost like, to me, he was a intruder. And he came home, he had a nervous breakdown. His job his job in the Army as a medic, in those days they didn't like conscientious objectors, World War II very much, was to pick up body parts and strap them onto the jeeps, and he lost his mind completely in France doing that. And so when he came back, he was recovering. I don't think he ever completely recovered his nerves from that. But at any rate, he and I, he loved me. I know now that he did, but I loved my grandparents, and I really admired them, and I didn't want to. My grandpa used to take me hunting snake skins in the woods and down to the hatchery to look at the chickens and things like that. And I always, he seemed to know what fun things I liked to do, and Dad didn't. And Grandma was my rock, and spiritually speaking. And Dad never filled that place. But he did preach on the Church of God a lot at first. He was saved in my mother's congregation, which was a congregation that had left Anderson in the 1920s. And Brother Kroll was our old pastor there. He came to Anderson, and they were wearing pearls in the choir at the Anderson camp meeting. He stood up in the General Ministerial Assembly, the best I've heard it, and told them that he wouldn't go along with that kind of worldliness, and that the wheels wouldn't turn fast enough on his car to get him off the Anderson campground. And one of the ministers said, "Would that we had an airplane." He was Irish, and most of them were Irish. My grandmother was English, and my grandfather on that side was German. My father was Irish background, and a very emotional crew in our congregation there. Anyway, I'll wait.
If you could give the names of your parents, and then also what's the situation that moved you to California?
All right. My father's name was, they called him Reverend, which we don't do for very good reason. Henry Pleasant Layne Jr. His father was an Irish railroad detective for the B&O Railroad. And my mother's name was Sarah Catherine Clakamp. And what was the other question? Oh, and the reason we went to California is because my parents wanted to get away from standards that we had in our congregation there and wanted to actually more of the world, so they went to California for that purpose. And he pastored then from the early 50s, 53 or 54, the First Church of God in Ontario, California. And that's where I grew up from that time on. They got a television right away. Mom cut her hair within the first month or two, and they eventually, years later, got wedding rings and took us to the beach and whatever. Did a lot of things that we were taught, they taught me that were wrong.
So approximately what age was that you moved to California?
8, 9 years old.
And so your memories and the messages, Sister Wessel and all
that was before that time.
That's Kentucky, okay.
Yeah, that's Kentucky. And I remember because our area, Kentucky, was always voted dry. We didn't have any sales of alcohol. There we didn't shop. We were taught not to shop anywhere where they sold alcohol, not to buy anywhere they had alcohol, not to eat anywhere they had alcohol. Well, that provided quite a problem for me. I took that very seriously. In fact, I remember as a small boy, we crossed the bridge to West Virginia, and there was saloons over there. You could see the bottles all along the wall through the big windows. And I remember telling my parents after we crossed the the bridge there at Canova, Captainsburg, Kentucky. I said, I'd like to get me a gun and shoot every one of those bottles. I grew up with a hatred of alcohol. And then when we left and went on the trip, which was a long trip then to California from Kentucky, that was a good 5 days or more, a very treacherous 2-lane highway, 1 lane going each way, no freeways. You had to carry water bags on the front, and the cars had no air conditioning and they were cold at night, no heating, cold at night and hot in the daytime. And we had 5 of us packed in there like sardines with everything we owned, I guess, about. And we went along a while, and everybody was hungry, so they decided to stop at a place to get something to eat. So they started looking for a place that didn't have alcohol, and couldn't find a place. And so finally they said, well, we're just going to have to stop at the next place, even if they sell it, and get us a sandwich or something, and we'll eat it in the car. And I was saved. I was a saved child. And I said, well, you all can eat if you want to. I'm not going to eat anything that comes out of one of those places. So I was probably 8. And so they went in and they got sandwiches for themselves, and Mom and Dad didn't got a sandwich for me, brought it out and gave it to me, and I said, I'm not going to eat it. I'm not going to eat it. So I guess I went as far as I could go hungry before I finally got someplace to choose. I found out there was a big wide world outside of Kentucky, and it wasn't all like home, so I eventually did. But I resisted all the changes that they made when they brought the television in, when Mom cut her hair, trip to the beach. Every time I would tell them, this isn't right. And I remember going into the worship the first time there in Ontario. And I was shocked because I hadn't seen all the women before and what they looked like. They all had short hair and pearls and jewelry, and it was a very cold, dead worship. It was so different than what I had been used to growing up, and I could hardly stand it. But through time, I was a little boy, and through time, I did what the family did, although there was still a longing in me, and I of course did have aunts and uncles and a grandmother that were holding a certain pattern, standard back in Kentucky, and that helped me to remember some things, but it was an entirely different spiritual environment. I had no confidence in a woman that would cut her hair. I never did. I was never able to see that. That was always a big thing for me. If they had cut hair, that seemed to just do it. I couldn't stand it in the pulpit. I couldn't stand singers with cut hair. And it bothered me that Mother cut her hair. Later on, even when I came back from drugs, after being out on drugs, Mother was still dyeing her hair. And she brought me home from service one time. That was in the 80s, early 80s. And I said, can I tell you something? She said, yes. And I said, I would just like a little white-haired mother. And she said, well, I've been thinking about that. She said, I think I'll just stop dyeing my hair. So she did. She stopped. Anyway, that answers those questions.
in Kentucky, what about your schooling? Did you just attend public school?
I attended public school. We had segregated schools. In our town, there was a black area, and it was right on the borderline. Our school was called Wiley Elementary School. It was right on the border of the black section of town. And like it was in the South Bend, everything was segregated. But being a border state, there was some question as to who was what. It was a matter of who could pass for what, and there was more, but they still tried to keep it separate. But I started in first grade. Mom and Dad said they took me to my, I don't know if this is interesting to you, but they took me to my first grade, first year, and they were kind of concerned about how I'd get along with the other children. And so they decided, they let me out, and I went, we were lining up by grade to go into the school. And Mom and Dad waited in the car to see me go into the school building. And the boy, I guess was in line behind me, gave me a shove. And I turned around and put my finger right in his face, telling him what. Dad said, "Oh, he'll be fine." So anyway, schools were different in those days. You got a good spanking. And my only problem in school is I was always taking the part of the underdog. It seemed like I had a friend, his name was Kent Corder, and his parents were divorced, which was a terrible stigma in those days. Hardly anybody was divorced. If you're divorced, you left town. And his parents were divorced. We lived with his father and brother, and I thought that was so sad. And he didn't get very good grades. His father was an alcoholic, and I thought that was terrible. And he loved me, and I loved him. So our report cards came out, and I got real good grades, and his grades were real bad. And I got mad. And I walked up to the teacher, and I laid my report card down on her desk, and I said, "You can have these back." Third grade. She said, "What are you talking about, Danny?" And I said, "If Kent can't get these kind of grades, then I don't want them either." She said, "I'm going to send you to Mrs. Winder, and she's going to give you a genuine good spanking as a principal." I said, "Well, you can just send me." So she did, and Miss Winder, who's a family friend, a lot of our family had gone through her school. She understood the situation, and she kind of brought me down off the wall. But I was determined to defend Kent to the last breath. Whipping wouldn't have changed that.
So in California, did you also attend public school?
Yes, and it was a huge culture shock because there, all the races were together. All of a sudden, we had black and Hispanic and white all together in the same classroom. It was quite a shock, and I loved it. I thought the Mexican people were just about the most beautiful people I'd ever seen, with that olive skin and dark hair. I thought they were just beautiful, and they knew another language. I thought that was just grand too. I thought, oh my, they were always talking, between them, and I thought, oh, I wish I could understand what they're saying. And I thought it was so bad that I couldn't speak another language, And so they had certain hairstyles that they wore ducktails, they call them, and waterfalls, and you wouldn't know about those, and different things. And they wore thick soles on their shoes and khaki pants and things like that. Most average people thought were just terrible. I thought it was just a badge of honor, and I wanted Mom to get me some shoes like they had, and I wanted just to do whatever they did. And so, yes, I went to school in public school from first grade right on through 11th grade. Most of that time in Ontario, California. And in my last year, my high school year, I wanted to get some relief. I had found the saints, what I thought were the saints at that time, and I wanted to go to a religious school, Christian school, yeah. And so they wanted to give me a music scholarship to go if I would sing for their school. So I did. I teamed up with a boy that played the accordion, and we traveled, and I played the piano and sang, and we traveled for our schooling. And then another man gave me a scholarship, and then I worked for piling chicken manure and doing all kinds of stuff. I mean, the boys' work to pay off the rest of my tuition. But I didn't get any relief from persecution by going to the Christian school, because all the bad children from all the holiness families in the whole area were going there. They didn't want to be there, so they were meaner than the ones the ones in public school. And that's another whole story. Anyway.
Brother Layne, can you just briefly, or however long you'd like to, speak about your post-secondary education after high school?
After high school. Well, I started in college, but that was after I backslid when I was 18. I went back, and I went into school, Chafee Junior College, and I was studying there, and I had made up my mind to try out philosophy and psychology, so I majored. I was heading toward a major in philosophy, minoring in psychology, trying to deal with my questions that there are answers to. I already had the answers to. And I didn't get very far because I was in drugs, and they caught me dealing on the school grounds and told me that I could have the choice of opting out of college. So I wasn't there very long, a few months. Most of my education really came from reading myself and an intense interest in all kinds of things. I followed that with reading. And, I'm not well educated.
So were you saved your whole primary and secondary school, first grade to...
Well, Brother Ray, I would say that I was, in the sense that I had a dynamic conversion in Kentucky when I was 6. I really, really prayed through and got saved, and there was no doubt about it. I was baptized shortly after that. When we went to California, I went into I don't know, the best way I can say it, because of all the changes, a state of confusion. I held on, I prayed, I sang, I went to service, I did, obviously compromised some vital principles, but as a child I didn't know what else to do. My family wouldn't suffer me to go on. I went through terrible pressure at home. I remember every dinner table being a terrible experience of mocking, and my father would preach messages from the pulpit on Sunday morning and point to me in the congregation and say, "There's my son. He believes in holiness. He's holy. He's holy." And those kinds of things. I continued, despite the pain of all of that, I continued, and they had guaranteed me that when I graduated that I could move in with Brother Ostis Wilson, who he and his wife, Sister Opal, had offered me to move into their home when I graduated. But I didn't quite make it because I had a nervous breakdown about 3 or 4 weeks before I graduated. And so Brother Ostis and them came to my graduation that night with Sister Kaiser. And when graduation was over, he asked me, he said, "Are you ready to go and live with me?" And I said, "No." So, and it wasn't because I didn't want to go, I didn't feel worthy, felt like I had failed the Lord, and really hadn't. It was accusations. But I didn't know, I was, my nerves were in such a state I didn't know what was happening. And so I just didn't want to do anything. Except I just didn't know what to do and I didn't want to do anything. So then it got so bad that I felt like I was not worth anything. And I remember feeling like I wasn't worthy of going to hell, really. And so I set off to destroy myself. And that's what I went out in the world to do. It wasn't to party or have fun with drugs. I just felt so unworthy of living. The scripture the devil kept bringing to my mind to accuse me was, "He will keep them in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on thee, trust in thee." And I thought, well, if I had been living like I should, I would have never had a breakdown. And I would have continued like I should have. And so then I left. After a while, I left the area, went to Las Vegas. Then the next 19 years, well, you all know pretty much about that. But I guess I look back and I see a lot of, now I see it as a lot of preparation for, and maybe you do in your life too, for what I'm doing now. If someone among the saints is having nerve problems, or they're having a problem with persecution, or a child like the harder children going through what they're going through, my heart goes out to them in a special way because it touches places in me, and I feel it. It's not just that I look at it. And so I see now where the Lord turned a lot of that for good. I went out in the world knowing very little about the world, though I hadn't really been to we call them picture shows, the moving pictures. I hadn't, our home was a decent home. We didn't have profanity. We didn't have My mother and daddy didn't argue. They kept in front of us. They kept us in service and in clothes and in food. And I appreciate all that. Anyway.
Brother Danny, who was your major influences as a child, and maybe in your younger years who influenced you that would affect you to be saved in later years?
Well, I have to say that I feel like a good number of the people in that church that was split off, that Dad was pastoring, which was not the original church, the Anderson church, but then he went to pastor the split off church where my mother's parents were. Those people there at the Gospel Tabernacle Church of God in Ashland, they formed, I think they helped form my character, especially my grandmother. She was a devout Christian. She lived it every hour. Everything to her translated into the spiritual. She was, well, I can't imagine CEO or anybody that I've ever heard of being any, and I'm trying to build up my grandmother, but I can't imagine any of them living any closer or more careful a life than she did, along every line, everything she'd say. I made up my mind that I wanted to be that kind of Christian, because I didn't see that in my parents, what I saw in her, and what I saw in some of the older people in the congregation. And so, in my mind, my heart, that was the standard of being a Christian. Not that my mother and father were bad people. They weren't, and I respected them. And as far as everyone in town would have told you they were a Christian, because they did. They lived morally upright lives. But as far as the depth and the real depth of living in the Lord, in Christ, I didn't see that there. And I detected things that I felt like were really out of order, especially in my father. So I think she was a mentor. Later on in California, she came out and lived in a little apartment right next to us, and I was privileged to have her there for a few years, I guess, in California with us. That was after my grandfather died. And she continued. She held her standard right firm. I kept wanting her to tell me how she felt about Mom, but she was very careful. She didn't. She wouldn't really open up. One time I caught her off guard, I think, and I asked her how she felt about Mom and my Aunt Dorothy, my mom's sister, cutting their hair. And she said, "Well, Nanny, they need help. They need help." And that spoke volumes, because I knew she was not going there. She was a real mentor. The shouting, the standard, all of that came from that congregation that became a part of my experience, or my spiritual thoughts.
Did they implant in you a vision of the Church of God?
Yes. That happened early. You've heard me tell it probably, how Mother said that they would always, when company would come over, they would always want to hear me preach. And I preached, and to me, I was talking to Brother Ray the other day, it was a very serious thing. I was exposed to spiritual ministry at an early age, by being taken witnessing and doing things. But even at a very, very young age, she said that I would have to have a real Bible, and they'd put it out on the footstool, and I would have to have a hanky there in case I cried or shouted. And she said I would just hit the hassock over and over and say, "Church of God, Church of God, Church of God, Church of God." That's all I would say. That was the message.
Praise the Lord.
And it's still the message. I feel like it's still the message. It proved to be, I think of me, it proved to be kind of a prophetic kind of thing, because later on, even when I would want to go preach to the unsaved, the Lord sent me to the saved, sent me to the church, which was not what I considered best sense, but that was the Lord's mind. I never, that's one way I knew it was the Lord, is because I wanted to go to the drug addict after I came back in 1980. I wanted to go to the drug addict and the street person. And that was where my burden was. And that's what I felt qualified to do. I felt I'm not qualified to deal with regular people because my nerves and my mind and where I've been and all that I've seen, it takes a toll, takes an effect on you. But you know who you can relate to and who you can't. And I thought, well, I can't relate to these church people. And some of my family not being able to forgive my waywardness, they felt the same way, you know. And so that reinforced it in my mind. But the Lord made it very plain that my ministry was to be concerning the church, and that had to be that way, and that He would let me minister to unsaved people, but that my thrust of my ministry overall would be the church. Didn't make sense there. I'm not sure it makes sense now. Sometimes it doesn't make too much, but anyway.
Brother Danny, when you were 14, you met Faith and Victory people.
Yes.
Did you, what was your vision of them, or did you think they were the church at the time, or did you?
Absolutely. It was such a great comparison between Anderson and them that I was absolutely amazed that there were people like that existed, who had a standard, who had the old songs and old books, whose focus was the Church of God. I was absolutely amazed, and to me, I had just found the church. That's all there was to it. And I came back and told my parents that I found the church. You all need to come and see what's over there. You'll love it. And of course, they hated the very thoughts. When they heard they didn't wear necktie, that was enough for them. They were running, not walking the opposite direction. They had no intention of going there, being a part of that. You have to remember that in 1950, well, when was that? 1958, probably. A lot of the old people who were alive at that time in the Faith and Victory movement had come out in the necktie split. Some of them had heard Warner preach, and they were very well versed in what happened in the split and the compromise, and they would testify about those things. It wasn't Brother E.M. Zinn who headed up the Faith and Victory people pretty much at that time as the eldest, he was the last editor, had been the last editor of the Herald of Truth, which was the opposition paper they started when they came out of Anderson. And he was an elderly man at that time. His wife, Sister Georgia, I knew them well. He really liked me. I don't know why. He liked me even more when he found out that I was an Anderson minister's son and was coming to the camp meeting and liked it. He really liked me. I remember one time I went to camp meeting there, and he told me, he came over to me and he said, "Now, brother," he says, "if you've got a message for us tonight, you just get up and give it." And I thought, what's he talking about? I'm a little boy. I don't know anything about delivering messages. But I was, at any rate, I remember him preaching one Sunday on the church. And brethren, I believe he preached for over 3 hours. And to me, it seemed like minutes. That was his main focus and burden, was to preach on the church. was amazing. Then I was sanctified there early on. Brother Isaac Chandler, he was a black brother, very tall, very big man, very smart man. He was an extremely intelligent man. His messages came across that way too. In fact, I think he has a child who's a federal judge now. He had 13 children. I was looking for sanctification, and I had read about it in Birth of the Reformation, the book Birth of the Reformation, and I was looking for that experience. I needed that, and I knew there had to be an answer other than just going to the altar all the time, like Dad said. Just go and consecrate. Just consecrate some more, Danny. It'll be all right. And I kept doing that, and it wasn't all right. I kept getting more and more discouraged. But he got up and preached in the camp meeting a long message on sanctification. He answered all the difficulties that I had in my mind concerning that, because I had been taught the one cleansing message. You know, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creature. How can you be new? God couldn't create you new, create you with a carnal nature and all the things. I can tell you everything they say anyway. But at any rate, I went down to the altar or the prayer bench and prayed, and he came and prayed with me and for me, and I obtained the experience. So that was before I went out on drugs. That was when I was 14. I'm kind of skipping back and forth. And then when we got up, he gave me a big kiss right on the mouth. And I was in stage shock. And I loved it. I thought, now that's something. Because we didn't really have holy kisses or anything else. But it was a sense of brotherhood that was wondrous. I don't know how to put it. It was fulfilling. It was just a wonder. And I wasn't in amazement because I didn't like it. I was just in amazement because of the feeling of it, the whole feeling of what had just happened. It was just amazing. And it also, we had ordinances in that meeting, and it fell my lot to wash his feet. And that just increased our bond. And I came back and I told everybody that was the church. But even then, I look back now in light of the scriptures that I understand now concerning the silence, and I look back and I see that they were in silence. The rejoicing, there was no militancy in the church. They were in a state of degradation, like when Nehemiah came back. The poor of the land were there, that had been left there, and hadn't gone to Babylon. And I look back and I see it. I see it. They were better off than the people who weren't in the land, but they were still poor and degraded. They were holding on to the songs through the Evening Light Songbook and reprinting some of the books in the publishing house. And I'm not saying they didn't have a lot of people who had good experience. I think they did, but it wasn't time. It wasn't time for the church to do more and be more at that time. But in comparison to Anderson, where I'd been, it was the church. And the roots of it went right back into the early Reformation with Brother Austin and the older saints there. So, yes, I thought it was. And when I got saved, that was my determination. Just go right back to, you just go back to the starting point where you were. You can't go where you don't know to go. So I went back, but I saw that it had really, really slipped, and I was shocked at some of the things that I saw that they were doing. Not just outwardly, but it just, it just disintegrated. But I thought, well, surely the Lord's going to do something, and what we'll do, we'll just put our shoulder to the wheel and we'll get this thing moving in the right direction, and I'll help all I can. I wasn't trying to lead them into anything or subvert them or anything. I just wanted to help. I loved those people, and I wanted to help in any way that I could. So I went place to place, holding meetings, doing whatever they asked me to do. I didn't volunteer for a lot of stuff. I just did what they asked me. I was ordained there in 1984, I believe. I started preaching in 1981. And Brother Ostis was one of the ones who signed my ordination certificate. He was the president of the council, the ordaining council. In the record that he put of that in the Faith and Victory paper of that year, he says something like, I don't know how to try to repeat, that how there was a special presence of the Lord on that particular ordinance service, I think, that he said he had never felt before. People in Faith and Victory have called me Ostis Wilson's Frankenstein. And probably a number of other things. I did all that I could do to try to be a blessing and a benefit to those people. I never tried to hurt them. I got a lot of help in my teenage years and later on, a lot of encouragement from a lot of those saints, and I have good memories of a lot of those times preaching, meetings that we had, and my memories of that is not all bad. However, it wasn't what God wanted to do. That could not be the end. So my memories of Brother Ostis and his first wife and many of the saints there are precious to me. I appreciate all of their contribution to my spiritual understanding. I fully acknowledge that I got a lot of that understanding from them, and I wouldn't profess that I just originated everything and got all my... I think we're all components of other people's labors. We all enter into someone else's labors, and I appreciate the things that I got from them.
Brother Danny, did you not say one time concerning your ordination, and I know at that time a number of those Faith and Victory ministers were against it, but Brother Ostis was basically the one that says, we're going to do this. Did he not tell them at the time that he felt that God had his hand upon you for a special work? I thought I recalled you saying that in early years.
It was quite a deal, because the ordination service was set for that afternoon. Already announced and set. And before that could take place, the ministers wanted to have a meeting. There was about 30 of them there on the grounds, and they wanted to have a meeting. That was in California, to discuss it.
That was in Pacoima?
That was in Pacoima, California. And so a number of the ordained ministers raised issues about it being a little too soon for me to be ordained. Well, I never asked to be ordained. I mean, I asked to be ordained anyway. So then it came down to several points. One major point with them was my strong beliefs in the standard of dress. That was one of the main. When everything kind of boiled down, and it came to that point after 3 or 4 hours of discussion, while people were waiting, whole tabernacle of people were waiting for the ordination service to begin, including my parents were there visiting. And so we we sat there, and I just sat and listened to them because I had nothing really, I had no vote in it at all, what to do at any rate. So I was just kind of watching this one, that one talk, and they were trying to be careful to talk around. They needn't have been, but at any rate, so he waited until they had all said pretty much everything that they had to say, and he asked if anyone had anything else to say, and they had all expressed, I think everybody there pretty much, maybe except for 5 or 6, had expressed themselves negatively about me being ordained. And so I just thought, well, I'm going to get out of this one. Get out and I won't be ordained. That's fine. And he said, well, he had palsy. Well, his voice kind of quavered. He said, I'll tell you. He said, I've known Brother Layne for a long time. He was going back when I was a child there on the ground. He said, if you're waiting to ordain Brother Layne until he changes concerning dress, he says, you'll wait a long time. But he's not going to change on the dress issue. And he said, besides that, he said, we're going to go ahead and ordain him anyway. So, they said, well, all right. They didn't say anything else, so they did that. So I was ordained, and then I proceeded to be one of the main called evangelists for that movement of people. I had already been doing that. And I'd already been a pastor. I was pastoring a little congregation there in Ontario. But I started traveling more. I held meetings in all the main congregations there, La Roger, Guthrie, Oklahoma City, pretty much Shawnee, pretty much all of their main congregations, and some that weren't their main congregations. I held meetings in new places. I held meetings in Dayton among those people. And I had in my mind to try to contact the Covingtons and Brother Orr. And then I was told by some who had labored in the Ohio area, don't have any contact with those people. You will ruin yourself, and you need to stay in the church to do your duty. Those people have had a chance to take the truth, and they wouldn't take it. And they're finished. I thought that was kind of... That didn't sound very good. To me, my Christian ear didn't sound very good. And I didn't say much. I just thought, well, if I get a chance, I'll go anyway. And then I'll deal with the fallout later, you know. But they wanted me to preach my meetings in their chapels only. And that was one of the things that they had thrown me down a no on it, because they had kind of put Clarence Fry, who had been one of their ministers there, out, and they didn't want me going down to try to reconcile. They didn't want to reconcile with him. Well, I wasn't trying to reconcile with him. I was just holding a meeting somewhere. But, yeah.
When did you start saying that faith and victory wasn't it? Or they had lost, or it was time to do something?
Well, I felt it was time, even before I backslid. I felt like there needed to be a standard raised up among those people. I felt like there was some real lack, even then. But when I came back in 1980, after having backslid, came back and was converted, I really saw the need. I thought, no, this cannot. There needs to be real. There needs to be a real revival. We didn't call a revival. There needs to be a real something happen here to deal with this issue. So I knew that from the beginning. A lot of some had television. They were having very worldly weddings. The young people were sitting in the back doing their homework on Wednesday night, and it was bad. It was bad. They were losing young people right and left. There was little burden for outreach. Generally speaking, the services were very, very dull, spiritually dull, and without much rejoicing, or it just wasn't a real encouragement. And the doctrine of, we're just holding on until Jesus comes. We're just picking the last few berries on the tops of the branches, and that we bought into all that. This is the church till Jesus comes. We can't expect a real revival. We can't expect anything really to happen. It's going to just kind of, best we can do is try to get our children in, to be saved, and that's about the best we can do.